But it was at that moment I said, this is it. I'm done with the poverty, I'm done with the chaos and the abuse and the dysfunction, and that's not going to be part of my life.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Economic Heroes podcast. My name is Robert Wallace, and today we have a very special guest. Not only is he a loving husband and a passionate father, but he is also the author of 3 books, including Worst of Mothers, Best of Moms, and he is also the CEO of Patrick Henry Family Services. Please welcome Robert Day.
Hey, thanks, Robert.
Absolutely. So I actually met you a couple months ago at an outreach event that Patrick Henry Family Service was hosting, and I heard a little bit about your story then, but I did not get a chance to come up and really speak to you. I had it in my mind that I wanted to ask you to come on the podcast then, just didn't really get a good opportunity until a couple weeks ago when Patrick Henry Family Services actually had another outreach event, and just so happened that I actually sit right beside you there. And I said, all right, this is my chance. So, we talked about it, and you're here today.
Absolutely, I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you. So, take us all the way back to the beginning, and
to the beginning.
To the beginning. Yeah, I like to start at the beginning. I even like to see, where were you from originally? Where you were born at, and then
okay, sure.
Yeah. So,
well, my family is from Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee, Appalachian folks. My mom was 15 when she got pregnant with me, dropped out of high school, went into foster care because of abuse. That was discovered because of a horrible crime that involved heavy drinking. And somebody was murdered during that event. And my mom was present, and so the state of Tennessee did their due diligence and protected her by taking her into custody. Placed her in an unwed mother's home. This was 1961. Those were very common places for unwed teenage moms in those days. Mm-hmm. And it was while she was there in that unwed mother's home that I was born. Also then a ward of the state since she was in foster care. Right. My mom initially put me up for adoption. Which was probably a wise move on her part. Mm-hmm. She's a high school dropout, under-resourced. She's the second oldest of 13 kids. Didn't know her father. So not a lot of options for her at that time. Right. She was then placed in a foster home closer to East Tennessee where she's from. And the her foster parents, when they learned that I was up for adoption, asked the state if they could foster to adopt me. And they made the unusual move of granting that request. And so a few months later, I follow my mom and I'm placed in the same foster home of George and Joanne Ball. Okay. Christian couple, older couple, couldn't have children, wanted children badly, but also I think had the sense of concern about orphan care and wanted to be involved personally. So the story goes that as I was growing up the first couple of years and beginning to talk, I called my mom Sis because George and Joanne Ball called her Sis, brother and sis. And we thought of them as our parents. So I was confused about this, apparently about this girl in the home that I didn't quite realize was my mom at the time. Then when she turned 18 and aged out of foster care, she made a fateful decision that I've regretted my entire life. She took me with her. The adoption, for some reason, I've never learned why it did not take place. I kind of imagine that my mom was probably safe for the first time in her life, thought maybe she could make a go of it, and decided that she wouldn't relinquish her parental rights. Okay. So when she left there, I went with her, and it was a lifetime of chaos and dysfunction. We moved 37 different places before I graduated from high school. Wow. Some of those were foster homes, not all of them. The pattern with my mom was that I rarely actually lived with her. I was usually with somebody else close by, a family member, a friend, foster care, sometimes strangers, it seemed like to me, because I didn't understand the connection at the time. Now, those first foster parents, George and Joanne Ball, Christian couple, loved the Lord, salt of the earth. They were hard-working farmers trying to make a living on rocky soil of East Tennessee. So they were not wealthy by any means, but they were generous in their affections towards me as a child and in their concern for me. And they prayed every day after I left that they'd have one more chance to care for me or be a part of my life. And so God answered that prayer by me being abused and placed in their home at age 10.
Wow.
Yeah. Some people have a hard time with me saying it that way, but I believe all things work eventually to the good of those who love the Lord and called according to His purposes. So I just see the big providence of God, even in the midst of bad things. So I was placed in their home, and that's where I learned the first part of the story, right? And because they knew that time with them would be short, they just poured everything they could into me. Lots of love and affection, lots of food. I could eat anything I wanted, as much as I wanted, whenever I wanted.
Really?
Yeah, because that was an issue. Food insecurity in my situation was an issue, and I always needed to know that there was something to eat. So they never stopped me from doing that. But they also gave me structure, right? I could play anywhere, leave my toys anywhere, but I could not leave them in front of the TV or play in front of the TV when Lawrence Welk was on, or the Waltons. I had to quote the memory verse of the week before prayer at supper time. And of course, I was in church every time the doors were open, right? Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, vacation Bible school. So it was there that I learned the books of the Bible, and I learned a lot of scripture that was planted in my heart that I would need later on. I kind of think of it as they put a lot of investment in my emotional savings account.
Right.
This affection and love, and this unconditional kind of love from them that I would kind of draw out later in life when I worried and wondered if anybody cared. I would remember George and Joanne Ball. And so just as they feared, about, I think it was probably maybe 6 months I was in their home, and I was eventually released and went back with my mom. And I'm a little older now, I'm 10. And so I'm pretty much able to do things on my own, not a whole lot of oversight on her part or the part of the people who were watching after me most of the time. So every Sunday morning, wherever I was in those 37 different places, most of the time I'd just get up and walk to the nearest church. Denomination didn't matter. I didn't know the difference. The size of the church didn't matter. The style of worship didn't matter. I was looking for the same experience. I was looking for George and Joanne Ball and Glade Springs Baptist Church, where I felt the sense of security and community and calm in the storm of chaos. And so that was planted in me, and so I say that Jesus saved my soul when I was 17, but the local church saved my life before I reached that point, because there were just countless folks in all those churches who just reached out to this poor kid who just showed up at church one day. Spoke kind words to me, showed hospitality, often gave me something to eat, sometimes money, sometimes clothes, those kinds of things. And looking back, I think about those churches and what did they know about me? Did they know I was from the trailer down the road with this where a lot of partying and stuff was going on, and is that why they cared for me? Or I don't know. I can remember some of their names and some of the faces, but I look forward to a great reunion one day in heaven to see all these folks and thank them personally for sometimes just temporary care for me.
Absolutely.
So, so I did manage to graduate from high school, and from there went on to college, and then from there I got 2 master's degrees. I've worked in the foster care system myself. My first job after I received my master's of social work was a child abuse investigator in Anchorage, Alaska.
Wow.
So I was the guy that was knocking on the doors and say, I'm here to investigate a report of harm. And in my about 2.5 year tenure there, I averaged taking 1 child into custody every day I went to work.
Wow.
So I've seen foster care both as a child in the system. I've seen it as the person who was making a decision about removing children. And then later on, my wife and I, after having 4 kids, decided there was room in our hearts and our home for more, so we became foster parents and foster children ourselves. So I've seen it from that side of it as well. And now the Lord has me at the head of an agency that's trying to figure out a better way to care for these kids than our current foster care system.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, how did you arrive at Patrick Henry Family Services?
Yeah.
How did you get there?
Yeah, so a long journey. I was in northern Indiana at the time that I found out about the job. This was 2010. Applied for the job. I was the first application that they received and was their number 1 choice all the way through. So I came in June of 2010. But really the journey between exiting that very chaotic childhood and adolescence and getting to a point where I could be an executive director of an agency like that was a journey in itself of healing.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't know what it meant to be a father. I had to figure that out. I didn't know what it meant to be a husband. I had to figure that out. And fortunately, because of the planting of the scriptures and prayers of those foster parents, who, by the way, continued to pray for me, I think every day of their life until they passed away. I had some sense of a spiritual grounding and this desire to want to be a good husband and want to be a good father. And I said, I want to break this pattern for my kids. I just didn't know how to do that. If you go on the CDC's website, you'll see a quote from the former president of the American Pediatrics Association that said that the ACEs, which stand for the Adverse Childhood Experiences, is the number 1 unaddressed public health crisis in America today.
Wow.
And it's based on a series of research that's been going on now for several decades. And they track these traumatic events in children's lives and what are the lifetime adult outcomes. And they're not good.
All right.
Without some kind of intervention, therapy, healing, children of trauma tend to become adults who cause trauma to their own children. That's the pattern we're talking about. And there's a basic score of 0 to 10, 0 meaning no trauma happened to this child, to 10, all the trauma that we know have consequences are there. So when I take the test, I score 9 out of 10.
Wow.
Yeah. When I took the test on behalf of my mom, knowing her story, she scores 10 out of 10. But when my children take the test, they score 0.
Wow.
So for me, that's the proudest thing, an accomplishment in my entire life, is that they didn't experience things that I did growing up. But it was a hard journey as an adult to figure that out. And I thank the Lord for my dear wife, who was patient with me and loved me. Also, though, sought counseling, right, to try to unpack that. I wish I'd started sooner and stuck with it. It was kind of intermittent in my life because of kind of pressure to do so. But if I'd have done it sooner and been more consistent with it, I'd have probably arrived sooner. But God just kind of kept working, not just in me growing professionally, but me growing personally,
right,
and becoming whole. And I think when I finally got to that place, then this opportunity opened, and I applied, and here I am.
Wow, that's awesome. So I was reading your book last night. I just made it through, and towards the end, it mentioned that I think it was when you were 17, you hit rock bottom. It always been tough, but it really hit rock bottom.
Yes.
When you were 17, and you were just mentioned that you were completely done. You didn't care what you had to do. You were changing.
Right.
So from that point on, what's the difference I think there's a lot of people that in some people's lives, they hit rock bottom. And then some people, they change and they say, I don't care what I got to do, I'm making a change. And they do make a positive change. But some people, they hit rock bottom and then they keep going further.
Yeah.
So what's the difference in those two avenues? Why do some people make a positive change and some people make a not so positive change?
That's a great question. At 17, it got so bad that I put a pistol to my head and was thinking about that's the change and this would be how I'd fix it. And but found the courage at the time just to put it down. But it was at that moment I said, this is it. I'm done with the poverty, I'm done with the chaos and the abuse and the dysfunction, and that's not going to be part of my life. But like I said, I didn't know how. So where was the courage to do that? One, I think because people who knew me were praying for me. Right, George and Joanne Ball were praying for me. I belonged to a little Baptist church where I became a Christian, and the youth minister and his wife were actively involved trying to help me. I spent many nights sleeping on their couch, eating their food. They were only 5 years older than me. They were college students themselves, serving this little church for $30 a week, and they practically feeding and caring for me on a regular basis. I think if they hadn't been in my life, I may have made a different choice. But because of a meaningful relationship with somebody that cared, it kept me from doing that. So I would go back to that. Where did the courage come from? Because I saw that there was hope. There was somebody. I think most people who get isolated and then hopeless, they don't know where to turn or where to go.
Right.
At Patrick Henry Family Services, we believe that with all the programs and all the services that we give our kids, and even all the program services I receive, both from the government and from other agencies, it was meaningful relationships that made the difference. Daryl and Darlene Shirley, those youth ministers, George and Joanne Ball, and I could name many others.
Right.
So I think that's really, really big, right? So a child growing up in a healthy family would already have that there, and easier than to have that courage to make the right kind of decisions. Also, I think people don't change because they're scared. There's a fear. I think that's my own philosophy, but I think middle class folks, kind of who work professionally, they fear loss. They fear failure. I mean, think about everything that most time middle class folks talk about. You got to get a good education so you can get a good job, so you can get a good house, so you can pay the mortgage, and you better get insurance in case something. I mean, everything's about not losing. Right. And then they make all those decisions based on a fear of loss. For the poor, for my family and growing up, poor are afraid of success.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do with it. They don't see it around them. They don't know anybody which they've seen that, and they may actually lose what it is that they have. So it takes courage for poor people or people in dysfunction to walk away from that because they don't know what the future of success and health looks like.
Right.
And literally scares them.
So I heard it explained one time that we have an internal thermostat almost, where say you're economically poor, you may be a 20-degreer, and if you start doing a little bit too well, you start getting a little bit too good of job, and a little bit too good of living circumstances, you start heating up your internal thermostat, then you're going to self-sabotage yourself and bring that back down to the 20-degree mark. Whereas if you're, say you're middle class or a little bit higher income, then you're an 80-degreer, then if you lose a job and you start falling below, then you're going to really start hustling, and you're going to do whatever you can to bring that temperature back up to where you think it belongs at that 80-degree mark.
So that's just the economic side. So then you add to that maybe trauma or dysfunction. So if chaos is the norm, you don't know how to feel or act when there's not chaos.
Right.
And it scares you. And so you almost have to cause some drama to feel better. And then we know from the science of the ACEs that trauma does rewire the brain. So think of a child who's growing, that brain is very moldable.
Right.
And for them to make sense of the chaos and the dysfunction, their brain literally rewires. So then as an adult, their mind is functioning from an old system that does not work for them as an adult in a healthy, normal environment. Yeah. And so they constantly self-sabotage. And I explained that in my second book. There were a number of things I did as an adult that I self-sabotaged, both professionally and personally. But you always do it in a way that it looks like it's somebody else's fault.
Right.
you got absolutely. You can't. It's not my fault. It's everybody else's fault that this bad thing happened to me. But you set it all up, and then you're relieved from all of the pressure of succeeding.
Yeah, that's right. Going back to when people hit rock bottom. I always like to say, and you may have heard it, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And that's basically, when you're ready to make a change, you're going to go out there and find a book, or you're going to go out there and find somebody and ask them some questions, or you're going to get on the phone and call somebody and ask them questions. If you want it bad enough, you will find a way.
Yeah.
Especially today. I mean, there's books and people and the internet, and if you have a phone and the internet, you can find a way if you want it bad enough.
No excuses.
But no excuses this day and age. But so if you had one piece of advice to tell your 17-year-old version of yourself now, with all the information that you know now, what would that be?
Yeah. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
You're going to be all right.
It's all going to be good.
It's all going to be good.
That's right. I mean, that's one thing I think about too. I mean, even on days where we think we have bad days, it's really...
It's nothing.
It's all good.
Yeah.
It's all good. So
then back to your question of, how do you make that decision? How do you want it bad enough?
Right.
The title of my second book is Desperately Healed, My Journey to Wholeness. I talk about desperation is the only friend of change.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. If you're comfortable, you can't change.
You can't change.
You can't change if you're comfortable.
So desperation can be a resource to do it. And so my theology says that that God will sometimes put you in that place of desperation.
Right. Yeah.
So that there will be change.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, guys, a couple other questions I want to ask you, and you can just answer these however you like.
Sure.
So, who do you think inspired you the most growing up?
Well, I'm going to say Daryl Shirley, and the reason why I say that, he was the youth minister, just making $30 a week, only 5 years older than me, took care of me. 4 weeks ago, I was at his funeral. Oh, he died unexpectedly in the middle of the night. When he left that church, he went home to his family's place in Louisville, Kentucky, because his dad needed help in the auto body repair shop that he ran. And Daryl never left that. He just took over the business and continued to run it.
Right.
There were 1,000 people at his funeral.
Wow. Really?
From a guy who ran an auto body repair shop, 1,000 people.
Wow, that's amazing.
So there must have been something that was built in his DNA that he continued to touch and affect the lives of people in the context that he had. And I'm sure there were times that he thought, Lord, why am I didn't plan on doing this.
Right.
I wanted to do other things. And yet he hunkered down and he did that. And his life was a success. He didn't build this great business, and he certainly didn't become wealthy. But when 1,000 people show up at your funeral, right, you must have done something
right,
really well.
Absolutely.
The family even debated whether to bury him in his blue mechanic uniform, yeah, because that's the only people I ever saw him in that.
Really?
He had a suit he wore on Sunday, and it was a blue mechanic 6 days a week.
Wow.
So they hung it by the casket so people would reckon, oh yeah, that was Darrell Shirley.
Wow.
So I'd have to say he inspired me.
Right. That's awesome.
There were times when I would, he would take me place and drop me off or come pick me up, or he'd feed me something, or he'd give me some money. And I said, Darrell, there's no way I can ever pay you back. Mm-hmm. And he said, I don't expect you to.
Right.
But one day you're going to be able to help somebody, and I want you to pass it on. Yeah. He was doing pay it forward before pay it forward was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And his funeral is evidence that he lived that philosophy.
Right. Awesome. So this is sort of a similar question, but so that's someone who inspired you, but who do you think taught you the biggest lesson growing up, or even now? Who do you think someone who has taught you the biggest lesson? What is that lesson?
Yeah, so when I graduated from high school, I didn't have anywhere to go. Kids need their parents all their lives. It doesn't just stop because you turn 18,
right,
but I didn't have anybody to turn to. And there was a couple named Damon and Joyce Helton. Mm-hmm. I went to work at a summer camp that they ran, and they kind of became my surrogate parents as adults. In fact, my children, they were the only grandparents on my side of the family they knew, even though they weren't legally their grandparents. And they taught me everything from how to pray to how to buy the right underwear.
Wow.
When you're a kid that never learned that,
yeah,
or that you're supposed to change it every day, or how long should you own a pair of underwear?
Right.
I mean, they taught me just very practical things, from spiritual stuff to just, again, how to take care of yourself. And I learned lessons about how to be a father and how to be a husband from Damon Helton.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's cool. What part about what you do now do you love the most?
I get great personal pleasure in seeing kids and families do better, and that we can get things turned around for them. I don't have a lot of direct involvement in that in my position.
Right.
But I'm wired in such a way that I love building the organization and finding the resources so that it can grow and do a better job. With each passing year, I get a lot of professional enjoyment out of that. So those two things keep me coming to work with a smile on my face.
Awesome.
Most days.
Yeah, most days. Well, this may be a tricky question for you, but if you weren't doing what you're doing now, what do you think you'd be doing?
I really can't see.
Yeah,
I've been kind of doing this. I've been in the child welfare kind of industry in one capacity or other for a long time, but this is my first chance to lead an organization, mm-hmm. Which would be like running a business. And I did run a business. There was, at one point I said, I'm tired of getting paid a social work salary. I'm going to go start a business. Well, I learned I'm better at not making a profit than making a profit. It is so much easier not to make a profit than a profit. So my business actually failed. It went bankrupt.
Really?
Yeah. We started it 6 months before the Great Recession of 2008. So part of that I can say wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
Wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
But
what type of business was that?
It was a book business.
Okay.
It was a wholesale book business.
Okay.
One time I owned a warehouse and had 500,000 books, and we were shipping books everywhere.
Wow.
Enjoyed it, but it crashed very fast. Right. Learned a lot of really important lessons from that. Mm-hmm. One is that I'm supposed to be doing something else with my life and not that.
Sure.
But I learned a lot about running an organization and leadership in that.
Mm-hmm.
So I joke about leading a nonprofit, but that I'm better at that than running a business. But we've seen a lot of growth at Patrick Henry.
Yeah.
Right. So I know then I'm supposed to be doing it on this side of the spectrum.
Awesome. Well, another question is, are you a goal setter? And if so, what are some goals that you have accomplished, and what are some that you're still working on?
Yeah. So small goals, you talked about finding a book, or I either read a book or listen to podcasts or go to Global Leadership Summit. I find some ways that I pour back into myself, leadership skills, management skills, those kind of things. And I just have a monthly goal of constantly doing that.
Sure.
We usually have annual goals at the organization. We right now have a decade-long goal of we're calling Vision 30. We believe that by June of 2030 that we can see no child in the foster care system in Lynchburg and the four surrounding counties.
Wow.
So that's causing us to gear everything up around that. What would we have to do to actually make that happen?
Yeah.
So then there's a whole bunch of sub-goals and objectives, right?
Right.
To do that.
Awesome. That's great. Well, what's one thing that a lot of people don't know about you that is cool or you wish they did?
Because I'm the public face of the organization and I speak a lot and tell my story.
Sure.
People think that I must be comfortable with that, but I'm an introvert.
Really?
Very much so. So it takes a lot of energy, and it's at the same time I enjoy doing it, but it just takes a lot of energy out of me. So most people don't think or know that. Very private person, and I call myself a recovering orphan.
Mm-hmm.
I still have this orphan spirit. So even though I'm 58 years old and been married for 37 years, had 4 kids, 2 master's degrees, all these things, sometimes even in my role, there's a voice that whispers in the back of my head, they don't really love you and they're going to leave you too. Mm-hmm. You're a failure. What do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are?
Right.
I think a lot of people struggle with those voices anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But for kids that come from those kind of backgrounds, those voices can be very loud sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. All right, so this is the Economic Heroes podcast.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, do you have a hero, and if so, who is that?
In the business world or economic world or just anywhere?
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that's a good question. I read a lot of different leadership books. Jim Collins, for example, is a good one. Patrick Lencioni, the Ideal Team Player.
Okay.
We've implemented a lot of that stuff in the organization. So I look to them. I don't know if I call them a hero, but I certainly look to them.
Right.
I would say I look to our first executive director at Patrick Henry Family Services. It was called Patrick Henry Boys and Girls Plantation back then. Bob McCullough was there for 31 years, and when I look at what he accomplished out of scratch, I often try to think, what would Bob do?
Right, yeah.
Because he left this wonderful thing, and I'm standing on the shoulders of this kind of a giant of a man.
Right.
And so I'd have to say he's a hero of mine.
Awesome. Well, Mr. Day, thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
I want to thank you for not only being an economic hero with your work with Patrick Henry Family Services, but also being a hero for the children.
Yes, sir.
And providing hope for tomorrow.
Yeah, man. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
God bless
Absolutely.
you.
Yes, sir.